You have no right to block our pipeline, Grandpa.
The HOA president sneered it right in my face, clutching her clipboard like it gave her the right to take whatever she wanted. For 6 long months, Vivian Blackwood and her crew made my life hell. Fake violations, threatening letters, court threats, all because I refused to hand over an easement for their $200,000 water project. They laughed. They bullied. They started digging anyway. What they never bothered to check, my grandfather didn't just leave me the land. He left me the deed to the entire Upstream lake, the only source of water feeding their whole damn pipeline. They were so sure they had already won. They had no idea what was coming. Justice, it turns out, tastes sweeter than the purest mountain spring water. Ever had an HOA try to steal what's yours? Drop your worst Karen story below. Who's the bully in your neighborhood? My name is Garrett Murphy, and 3 years ago, I thought moving to my grandfather's 47-acre property would finally give me some peace. Wrong. I'm 58, divorced, retired civil engineer. After 30 years designing water systems and a messy divorce that took half my savings, I needed somewhere quiet to rebuild my life. Grandfather's converted barn workshop seemed perfect. Mountain views, Lake Willow reflecting pine trees like a mirror every morning. That first cup of coffee on the deck, listening to loons call across still water while morning mist rose from the lake, pure peace. Lake Willow isn't just decorative. It's fed by mountain springs, 40,000 gallons of crystal clear water that's been the valley's heart since before Colorado was a state. Grandfather used to tell stories about how the Ute tribes considered it sacred, how early settlers fought over access rights. 3 generations of Murphys had protected this place. Then the McMansion invasion happened. 2019. Developer bought the adjacent farmland, crammed 47 houses onto lots barely big enough for their 3-car garages. Suddenly, my quiet valley had an HOA with opinions about everything. Enter the villain, Vivian Blackwood. Picture this nightmare. 52, former pharmaceutical sales rep who treated every conversation like a hostile negotiation. White Mercedes always spotless despite dirt roads. Treats HOA presidency like she's running a Fortune 500 company. The woman carries a clipboard everywhere. Church, grocery store, her own driveway during neighborhood inspections. First encounter, Saturday morning, 8 a.m. Click, click, click across my gravel and designer heels that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. Mr. Murphy, Vivian Blackwood, HOA president. We have exciting plans. The fake smile. Business casual on weekends. That nasal voice that somehow carries across half the county when she's lecturing neighbors about property standards and community values. She spreads out architect drawings. Willowbrook Falls, this gaudy artificial waterfall with LED lighting and decorative stonework that looked like a Vegas hotel threw up on a Home Depot display. We're planning a community water feature to boost everyone's property values. The preliminary survey shows optimal flow from your lovely pond directly to our community park. Just need a tiny easement, maybe 30 feet, to run the pipeline. Tiny easement. Like I should thank her for only stealing part of my family's legacy. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm not interested in any easement discussions. Boom. Mask dropped. Those fake friendly eyes went ice cold for exactly 3 seconds. Then the smile snapped back into place like a bear trap resetting. Well, I'm sure once you understand how this benefits the entire community, you'll reconsider. Property values, Mr. Murphy. A man of your background must appreciate efficient land use. My background. Like being a civil engineer somehow made me too stupid to understand property rights. She handed me a folder thick as a phone book. Preliminary impact studies and community benefit analyses designed to make theft sound like charity. The whole thing reeked of her overpowering floral perfume, clashing with the clean pine scent around my workshop. Even after she left, I could smell it on my hands for an hour, like a threat that wouldn't wash off. That evening I called Rebecca Stone, college friend, local lawyer, sharp as a blade with zero tolerance for bullies. Rebecca, what do you know about water rights in Colorado? Why? What kind of trouble are you in now, Garrett? The expensive kind. HOA president thinks she can force an easement across my property. Long pause. Garrett, your grandfather was water commissioner for this entire valley back in the day, wasn't he? Yeah, for like 40 years. Why? Just curious. I'll check some county records tomorrow. Something tells me Vivian Blackwood hasn't done her homework. The taste of my well water, mineral-rich, crisp from mountain springs that have been feeding Lake Willow since before this valley had a name. Some things are worth protecting. Some things are worth fighting for. 10 days later, the certified letter arrived. Thick envelope, legal letterhead. Sterling and Associates, attorneys at law, in gold-embossed letters, screaming expensive intimidation. 3 pages of legal jargon demanding my response regarding eminent domain proceedings for public benefit water access rights. They claimed Vivian's HOA had community water rights and authority to acquire necessary easements through judicial process. Translation: give us your land or we'll steal it in court. The packet included architect renderings of completed Willowbrook Falls, LED waterfall cascading over fake rocks, walking paths with benches, decorative bridges spanning my property line, my land, their theme park. I called Rebecca immediately. They can't actually do this, right? Let me see that letter. Papers rustling. Sterling and Associates. Garrett, I remember these clowns from the Henderson drainage case 2 years ago. What happened there? Judge threw out their eminent domain claim in 15 minutes. Turns out HOAs can't just declare themselves government entities when they want someone's property. Sterling lost so badly the judge sanctioned them for frivolous legal theories. Suddenly, Vivian's scary legal threat looked like a paper tiger with expensive letterhead. My engineering background kicked in. When someone threatens you with fake authority, you counter with real documentation. Next morning, county courthouse. That limestone building smelling like dust and decades of bureaucratic battles. I need every property record for the Murphy land dating back to 1924. Mrs. Henderson behind the counter lit up. Murphy? You're Tom Murphy's grandson. That man understood water systems better than anyone in the valley. She disappeared into basement archives, returning with boxes untouched for years. Deeds, water rights certificates, survey maps, hand-drawn and fountain pen. The musty smell of old documents mixed with growing excitement as I photocopied everything. Colorado water law from my engineering courses. First in time, first in right. Whoever established water rights first wins, period. Doesn't matter what gets built later. Senior rights are bulletproof. My family's water rights certificate, dated 1931. Vivian's fancy development, built 2019. 88-year head start. Legal, game over. But the real bombshell was buried in the 1987 professional survey that Vivian's team had apparently never bothered to read. Lake Willow sits entirely on Murphy property. Not 1 inch crosses disputed territory. Every drop feeding her pipeline belonged to me. Time for systematic counterattack. I prepared my documentation package like an engineering report. Timeline of harassment, photos of unauthorized survey stakes, copies of every threatening communication, plus the historical water rights proof. Then I drafted my response. 1 page, engineer simple. Mrs. Blackwood, Lake Willow and all associated water rights remain exclusively on private Murphy property, per county survey dated 1987. Colorado water law establishes senior rights dated 1931, supersede all subsequent development claims. Any pipeline construction accessing said water source without written easement constitutes trespass and theft of natural resources. Further unauthorized access will be prosecuted under state law. Professional, polite, legal kryptonite. I hand-delivered copies to the county planning office, the sheriff's department, and Vivian herself. The crunch of gravel under my boots walking to her front door felt like planting a flag on conquered territory. Her retaliation came swift and vicious. Emergency HOA meetings about my obstructionist behavior, claims I was holding up progress and hurting property values with selfish water hoarding. She organized surveillance campaigns, HOA members driving slowly past my gate, photographing my property like I was running some criminal operation. The daily smell of diesel exhaust from their parade of SUVs became my morning alarm clock. But Vivian's fatal mistake? She started spreading rumors that inherited water rights might not be legally valid. Dead wrong. Rebecca confirmed property law basics. Water rights stick to land like superglue. Inheritance, sale, divorce, bankruptcy, doesn't matter. Rights transfer automatically with deeds. That's when I noticed fresh tire tracks in impossible locations around my property perimeter. My paranoia paid off. I installed a hunting camera near the gate, angled toward the road. Within 3 days, photographic evidence. Vivian's white Mercedes parked at my property line during pre-dawn hours, her silhouette visible through the windshield as she documented my daily routines with telephoto lens. She was stalking me. The bitter taste of morning coffee mixed with cold anger. This wasn't about easements anymore. This was personal warfare against a woman who'd never been told no in her entitled pharmaceutical sales career. But Vivian had made a critical tactical error. Harassment campaigns work on people who don't understand systems. I'd spent 30 years designing infrastructure under pressure, learning patience, letting opponents reveal weaknesses before striking back. The sound of her Mercedes engine idling outside my gate each morning became music to my ears. Because every boundary she crossed, every rule she broke, every escalation she chose, was another piece of evidence for the systematic response I was building. She thought she was hunting helpless prey. She had no idea she'd declared war on someone who understood exactly how to turn natural forces into controlled weapons. 2 weeks later, Vivian escalated to full psychological warfare. County code enforcement showed up at my door claiming anonymous complaints about my converted barn workshop, unpermitted structure, commercial activity in residential zone, septic violations. My 1952 grandfathered building that had survived every inspection for 70 years. I handed over original permits and the 1987 clearance documents. The officer flipped through pages, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Sir, these appear legitimate. Who filed the complaints?" Anonymous tip line. Anonymous my ass. The harassment campaign went nuclear. HOA members began driving past my property at walking speed, photographing everything. My workshop, my truck, my dogs, even my mailbox got the paparazzi treatment. The sound of engines downshifting as they crawled past became my daily torture soundtrack. Diesel exhaust lingering in mountain air that used to smell only of pine. But Vivian's masterpiece was the rumor mill. Dangerous recluse hoarding water during drought. Probably unstable after his divorce. Threatening community safety with his isolation. She painted me as some survivalist hermit, selfishly controlling resources while families suffered. The smell of fresh gossip spread through HOA coffee mornings faster than wildfire through dry timber. Stories grew with each telling. By week's end, I was apparently armed, paranoid, and plotting to poison the community water supply. Then came the mini twist that changed everything. That evening, my phone rang. "Garrett, this is Danny Morrison. I was the code officer who visited today. Didn't recognize you at first, but you worked on the Denver water expansion with me 15 years ago." My blood pressure spiked. "Danny, what the hell are you doing in code enforcement?" "Career change after the divorce. Listen, something's seriously wrong with permit applications in your area. Your HOA submitted paperwork for major water infrastructure, listing someone named Vivian Blackwood as certified water rights consultant. She's a pharmaceutical sales rep with zero water experience." That's what I figured when I Googled her. But here's the kicker. She claimed Lake Willow straddles your property line, giving the HOA partial access rights. I saw your survey today. That's complete fiction. Filing false government documents. We'd crossed into federal offense territory. I started my counterintelligence operation immediately. Rebecca helped me file Freedom of Information requests for all HOA communications with county offices. The paper trail revealed systematic deception that made my engineering brain furious and my strategic mind excited. Vivian had been running a three-way con game to the county, claimed unanimous HOA approval for pipeline project. To the HOA, claimed county pre-approval for water access. To contractors, promised guaranteed unlimited water source with municipal backing. None of it remotely true. But the financial fraud was even worse. HOA budget records showed project costs mysteriously doubled from $90,000 to $180,000 without member notification. Contractor emails revealed Vivian telling different companies wildly different price points, inflating estimates, and skimming management fees from each bid. She wasn't just stealing my water, she was systematically embezzling from her own neighbors while painting herself as their champion. The community dynamics started shifting in unexpected ways. Some HOA residents quietly approached me, expressing serious doubts about the project. Sandra Walsh, mother of twin toddlers, worried about heavy construction noise and equipment safety around children. The elderly Kowalski couple mentioned their property taxes suddenly spiked 30% after enhancement rumors began circulating through assessment offices. Not everyone was my enemy. Vivian had been railroading some residents, just like she was railroading me. My strategic response was methodical and patient. Filed formal complaints about unauthorized surveying and false permit applications. Attached Danny's witness statement, plus comprehensive photographic evidence of repeated trespass. Let the bureaucratic machinery start grinding inexorably toward Vivian's throat. But my real weapon was letting her keep digging deeper. Every lie to government offices, every false document, every fraudulent claim about water rights and community approval. All meticulously documented. All serious felonies under Colorado state law. Meanwhile, the personal harassment campaign intensified beyond belief. She convinced HOA supporters that my selfish water hoarding was actively destroying their property values and blocking community prosperity. Suddenly, strangers treated me like a pariah, sabotaging their American dream. The bitter taste of social isolation mixed with morning coffee as I watched former neighbors cross streets to avoid conversation, their faces twisted with manufactured resentment. But Vivian's desperation led to her biggest tactical mistake. She began pressuring county commissioners through her husband's extensive insurance connections. Richard Blackwood's agency held lucrative contracts, covering several county departments and municipal services. Reviewing coverage options became thinly veiled code for approve our permits or lose your insurance protection. Corruption, bribery, abuse of public office for private gain. That's when I knew she was completely finished. The evening air carried the scent of pine needles and approaching storm clouds as I sat on my deck, watching Vivian's Mercedes cruise past for the 4th time that day. She thought she was applying relentless pressure, wearing me down through constant surveillance and systematic community isolation. She had no idea she was providing comprehensive evidence for federal prosecutors who take very dim views of insurance fraud and falsified government documents. 3 weeks into October, Vivian crossed the line from harassment to outright intimidation. She hired a private investigator, not for the HOA, for herself, paying cash to dig up dirt on my divorce, my finances, anything that could be weaponized against me. The PI started showing up everywhere. Gas station, grocery store, even followed me to Rebecca's office, sitting in his car with telephoto lenses like some discount paparazzi operation. But Vivian's psychological campaign got more personal. She filed a formal complaint claiming my border collies were menacing neighborhood children and creating unsafe conditions for families. My dogs, who spent their days chasing tennis balls and napping in sunbeams. The animal control officer who responded took one look at Max and Belle, wagging their tails and rolling over for belly rubs, then shook his head in disgust. "Ma'am, these are the friendliest dogs I've seen all month. Whoever filed this complaint has serious credibility issues." But the harassment was working on my neighbors. Parents started pulling their kids inside when I walked past. The mail carrier began leaving packages at the road instead of my door. Even the UPS driver treated me like I might be building bombs in my workshop. The smell of fear became as thick as morning fog rolling across the lake. Then came the mini twist that revealed how deep this conspiracy ran. The private investigator called me directly. "Mr. Murphy? This is Jake Henley, licensed investigator. I need to speak with you about Vivian Blackwood." My blood went cold. "What about her?" "She hired me to find criminal or financial dirt on you. When I told her you're clean as fresh snow, she offered me a bonus to fabricate evidence." I almost dropped the phone. "She asked you to manufacture fake evidence? $5,000 cash to create false documentation about gambling debts or tax problems. When I refused, she threatened to report me to the state licensing board for inadequate investigation services." Jake turned out to be Rebecca's ex-husband. Small world, big coincidences. "Rebecca doesn't know I'm calling," he continued, "but this woman is dangerous. She's also been approaching other rural property owners with similar partnership offers." A pattern emerged that made my engineering brain click into high gear. Vivian wasn't just targeting me. She was systematically identifying properties with water features, pressuring owners into development partnerships that transferred resource rights to HOA control. 2 families had already buckled under pressure, selling water access rights for 20 cents on the dollar just to end the harassment. I started building my alliance network, contacted every targeted property owner Jake identified, formed an informal, rural property rights coalition that shared information about Vivian's tactics and legal vulnerabilities. The group included Judge Patricia Herrera, retired but still sharp, local contractor Mike Santos, and organic farmer Elena Rodriguez, who understood irrigation law better than most lawyers. We met at Rebecca's office on Wednesday evenings, the taste of cheap coffee mixing with determination as we planned our collective defense. Meanwhile, Vivian's surveillance escalated to stalking territory. She began parking outside my driveway during my morning walks, watching through binoculars while pretending to talk on her phone, following me to town, always staying 3 cars back, but never bothering to hide her white Mercedes. The psychological pressure was constant. Every grocery run became a covert operation. Every trip to the hardware store felt like running a gauntlet of hostile stares and whispered conversations. But her legal gambit was the most audacious yet. Vivian filed an actual lawsuit claiming my refusal to negotiate constituted interference with community development and restraint of trade. She demanded court orders forcing easement negotiations and claimed damages for lost property values caused by my obstruction. The lawsuit included aerial photos of Lake Willow with digitally manipulated annotations suggesting shared ownership boundaries. Professional-grade deception that must have cost thousands. Her legal theory? HOA members had reasonable expectation of water access based on marketing materials that promised lakefront lifestyle when they bought their homes. Except those marketing materials never mentioned my private property. They just showed pretty pictures of water and let buyers assume access rights. Rebecca's investigation revealed the lawsuit was funded through emergency community development grants. Actually, Vivian's personal crusade using HOA reserves without board approval. We also discovered her husband's insurance agency stood to profit from every construction contract, creating a massive conflict of interest she'd never disclosed. The physical reconnaissance phase began that week. Using skills learned during hunting season, I started observing HOA construction planning meetings through community center windows, watching Vivian point at maps, gesture toward my property, and promise contractors guaranteed access to unlimited water. The wet grass soaking through my boots during covert surveillance missions carried the scent of coming winter and approaching confrontation. Distance conversations revealed timeline pressure, emergency water access, backup reservoir options, alternative sources if negotiations fail. She was preparing for war while publicly pretending to negotiate peace. That's when I began my own physical preparation phase. Started routine fall maintenance on Lake Willow's outflow system, installing what looked like water quality monitoring equipment but was actually infrastructure for something much more dramatic. The metallic taste of pipe fittings mixed with anticipation as I prepared the trap that would end this war permanently. The breakthrough came buried in a dusty filing cabinet at the county courthouse. Rebecca and I were digging through property records dating back to territorial days when she found it. A leather-bound document folder marked Murphy Valley Development Agreement, 1924. Inside, the smoking gun that would end Vivian's war permanently. My grandfather hadn't just bought land in 1924. He'd signed a formal agreement with the original Valley developer, establishing Murphy family as perpetual water commissioners for the entire watershed. The legal language was crystal clear. In consideration of Thomas Murphy's sacrifice of farming income to serve as unpaid watershed manager, the Murphy family shall maintain authority to regulate, divert, or restrict water flow for conservation purposes in perpetuity. Rebecca's hands actually trembled holding the document. "Garrett, do you understand what this means?" "Enlighten me." "Your family didn't just get water rights. You got water authority. Legal power to control every drop flowing through this valley." The technical revelation hit me like a lightning bolt. Lake Willow wasn't decorative. It was the primary flood control system for the entire watershed. My grandfather had built the outflow infrastructure that prevented seasonal flooding of all downstream properties, including Vivian's precious McMansion development. Without Lake Willow's controlled drainage, her HOA sat in a natural floodplain that would turn into a swamp every spring. Her expensive houses only existed because my family had been managing water flow for nearly a century. The 1924 agreement included provisions for emergency drainage procedures during construction threats to water quality. If Vivian's pipeline project threatened watershed integrity, I had legal authority to drain the lake completely. And once drained for maintenance, I could legally prevent refilling until construction threats ended. Rebecca consulted a water rights specialist who confirmed the document's absolute validity. Colorado law strongly protects senior rights holders, and conservation authority clauses give broad discretionary power. Better yet, attorney fees for HOA's frivolous lawsuit could be recovered under state nuisance statutes. The historical context made everything clear. Grandfather's handwritten notes in the deed margins, for the land and for those who respect it. He'd anticipated future development pressures and created legal protection that would last generations. This wasn't just property ownership, it was environmental stewardship with teeth. The emotional weight of understanding my family legacy mixed with the bitter satisfaction of holding Vivian's destruction in my hands. But I made a strategic decision that would maximize the damage. Instead of revealing my water commissioner authority immediately, I'd let Vivian commit fully to the pipeline project. Let her spend HOA money on permits, contractors, and equipment before pulling the plug. The goal wasn't just stopping her theft, it was making the failure so expensive in public that she'd lose all credibility permanently. Rebecca helped me research legal precedent cases involving water rights disputes. The strategy became clear. Frame any drainage as environmental protection, not property retaliation. We prepared documentation linking pipeline construction to watershed contamination risks, created a paper trail showing how heavy equipment would disrupt wildlife migration patterns and soil stability. The beauty of legal water authority meant I could stop Vivian's project without appearing vindictive. I'd be protecting the environment, not defending property. That evening, sitting on my deck watching sunset reflect off Lake Willow's surface, I felt my grandfather's presence like never before. The taste of mountain spring water, mineral-rich, pure, irreplaceable, carried decades of family sacrifice and stewardship. 3 generations of Murphys had protected this watershed. Vivian thought she was stealing from one old man. She was actually declaring war on a century of conservation legacy with legal authority she couldn't comprehend. Some battles are won with lawyers and documents. Others are won when you discover you're not just defending property. You're wielding government authority your enemies never knew existed. The irony was perfect. Vivian kept demanding I respect community water rights, while harassing the actual water commissioner whose authority superseded every HOA vote, every county permit, and every legal threat she'd manufactured. Tomorrow, I'd begin preparing the trap that would turn her $200,000 construction project into the most expensive mud pit in Colorado history. Justice flows downhill, and I controlled every valve feeding that flow. The water control system I designed would have made my grandfather proud. Over the next 2 weeks, I engineered what appeared to be routine fall maintenance upgrades to Lake Willow's outflow infrastructure. Solar-powered remote valve systems disguised as environmental monitoring equipment. The technology was brilliantly simple. Gravity-fed drainage, allowing complete lake evacuation within 48 hours, refilling within 72 hours depending on spring flow rates. One smartphone app could turn Vivian's guaranteed water source into empty mud. Rebecca researched legal precedent while I installed hardware. She found dozens of cases where senior water rights holders had exercised conservation authority to protect watersheds from development damage. The strategy crystallized. Document environmental threats from pipeline construction, then invoke emergency drainage powers to preserve ecosystem integrity during industrial activity. Legal takeaway. Senior water rights in Western states function like constitutional amendments. Newer laws can't override established authority. My alliance network expanded beyond expectations. The Rural Property Rights Coalition grew to include environmental groups concerned about watershed preservation. Dr. Sarah Palmer from the Colorado Wildlife Federation provided scientific documentation of how construction noise disrupts migration patterns. Retired Judge Herrera guided us through proper legal procedures for exercising water commissioner authorities. Garrett, you're not just defending your property, you're enforcing environmental law that predates their entire development. Local contractor Mike Santos agreed to provide equipment for the lake maintenance project at cost. His crew would handle the visible work while I managed the technical systems remotely. Elena Rodriguez documented seasonal water flow patterns supporting our conservation argument. Her irrigation expertise helped design the refill timeline that would maximize impact. The physical trap preparation felt like engineering poetry. I installed cellular-controlled valve assemblies during normal winterization routines, hidden within existing infrastructure that had operated unchanged for decades. Backup manual controls integrated seamlessly with grandfather's original design. Every morning, I photographed pristine lake conditions, crystal water reflecting autumn colors, wildlife feeding undisturbed, perfect ecosystem balance, creating a visual record of what pipeline construction would destroy. The documentation phase required meticulous attention. Rebecca prepared comprehensive press materials, focusing on grassroots conservation versus corporate development overreach. Environmental reporters at the Denver Post and Colorado Springs Gazette received background briefings about watershed protection and rural property rights. We developed social media campaigns highlighting the David versus Goliath narrative, century-old family stewardship against HOA greed and government corruption. The communication strategy emphasized environmental protection, not personal revenge. Financial documentation revealed even worse HOA mismanagement than suspected. Coalition members compiled evidence showing Vivian's community enhancement budget had tripled without member approval. She'd been telling different cost estimates to different contractors, skimming profits from each inflated bid. Her husband's insurance company showed unusual involvement in project planning, creating obvious conflicts of interest she'd never disclosed to residents. The technical implementation required precise timing coordination. Remote monitoring systems powered by solar panels could trigger drainage during contractor mobilization for maximum psychological impact. I coordinated with Rebecca's legal filing schedule to ensure media coverage peaked during equipment failure. Environmental group demonstrations would coincide with mysterious water disappearance, creating perfect visual narrative for news coverage. The psychological preparation was equally important. I practiced explaining technical water management concepts in simple terms for media interviews. Rehearsed, calm, authoritative responses to Vivian's inevitable accusations of sabotage and environmental terrorism. Prepared visual aids showing historical water rights documentation and environmental benefits of controlled drainage. Mental preparation for temporarily becoming a public figure in a property rights battle that would attract statewide attention. Community outreach began subtly but effectively. I started informal conversations with HOA residents who'd privately expressed doubts about the pipeline project, sharing historical information about watershed management without revealing the full strategy. Established relationships with local media through letters to editors about rural property preservation. Planted seeds for broader community support when the conflict went public. The engineering elegance satisfied my professional pride. Remote valve systems controlled via smartphone apps, powered entirely by renewable energy, integrated with infrastructure that had functioned perfectly since 1924. Modern technology serving traditional conservation values. Technical takeaway. Rural property monitoring systems can operate independently for months using cellular networks and solar power, providing complete remote control over critical infrastructure. Late evening installation sessions carried the scent of pine needles and approaching winter storms. The metallic taste of pipe fittings mixed with anticipation as each component clicked into place. Grandfather's ghost seemed to approve of technology serving conservation goals he'd established with hand tools and determination. By Halloween, the trap was set. Vivian's construction timeline called for equipment mobilization the first week of November. Perfect timing for demonstrating what happens when you declare war on someone who controls the thing you need most. The taste of revenge would be sweeter than mountain spring water, especially when mixed with the sound of diesel engines choking to death in fresh mud. November arrived with Vivian's full commitment to her doomed pipeline project. The HOA board meeting, where she railroaded final approval, was a masterpiece of manipulation and financial fraud. Under pressure from her manufactured timeline, members voted 6-3 to proceed, despite mounting community concerns. She'd secured a $180,000 construction loan, using community assets as collateral, without disclosing her husband's insurance company would profit from every contract. 20% down payment to Mountain Vista Construction, completely non-refundable. The smell of desperation mixed with autumn leaves, as Vivian launched her social media campaign, portraying me as a selfish water hoarder threatening community progress. But her first major mistake came within hours. Mountain Vista's project manager, Tom Bradley, called me directly after reviewing the construction site. "Mr. Murphy, I'm supposed to start work on your neighbor's pipeline project next week. Company policy requires environmental impact assessments before major excavation. The HOA told us the impact study was already completed." "What study?" "Exactly. Ma'am named Vivian said you were cooperating with water access, but I'm looking at survey maps that show the lake entirely on your property." I invited Tom to inspect the site personally. Walking the property line with a professional contractor, I watched his expression shift from confusion to anger. "Sir, this woman lied to us about everything. Water rights, environmental clearance, even basic property boundaries. We could lose our licensing working from false information." The mini twist that changed everything. Tom's construction company had worked with Danny Morrison on county projects for years. They immediately coordinated to expose Vivian's permit fraud to state environmental agencies. My counterintelligence operation accelerated. Rebecca's investigation revealed Vivian's sabotage attempts had escalated beyond harassment. She'd tried contaminating Lake Willow with diesel fuel, accidentally, spilled from overfilled equipment, claiming it was environmental contamination requiring immediate drainage. Chemical analysis proved the diesel was wrong grade for any legitimate equipment. Intentional poisoning of a protected watershed. Federal environmental crime territory. Trail cameras captured her attempting to damage the outflow system with a crowbar, then calling county emergency services claiming vandalism investigation required immediate access to private property. She was manufacturing crises to justify government intervention. The construction mobilization began despite obvious red flags. Heavy equipment arrived at the HOA's staging area. Bulldozers, excavators, pipeline sections worth more than most people's houses. Vivian held a press conference announcing Historic Community Enhancement Project. Standing in front of architectural renderings showing completed Willowbrook Falls with LED lighting and walking paths, she claimed partnership with neighboring watershed manager, implying my cooperation without explicitly lying to cameras. The local newspaper ran her press release verbatim without fact-checking. My documentation phase captured every fraudulent claim. Photographed all equipment, contractors, staging areas with GPS coordinates and timestamps. Recorded Vivian's public statements claiming my cooperation. Video evidence of construction crews measuring pipeline routes across my clearly marked property boundaries. Environmental damage from heavy equipment staging in protected wetland areas provided additional ammunition for state agencies already investigating her permit fraud. The pressure campaign reached psychological warfare levels. Vivian appeared on community radio shows discussing modern water management and sharing natural resources for community benefit. Anonymous flyers appeared throughout the valley, claiming my water monopoly was destroying property values and blocking economic development. The campaign portrayed pipeline construction as flood control improvement, benefiting everyone, while painting me as an extremist environmental terrorist hoarding public resources. My legal positioning became unassailable. Rebecca filed formal objections to all construction permits, citing missing environmental impact studies and unauthorized property access. Provided detailed technical analysis showing pipeline route crossed private land without valid easements. Documented how construction staging violated county wetland protection ordinances and state environmental regulations. Prepared formal water commissioner emergency authority declarations for immediate activation. The financial stakes mushroomed beyond Vivian's control. HOA contractors ordered specialized pipeline materials, custom fabrication that couldn't be returned or resold. equipment rental agreements locked in for 6-week minimum terms with severe penalties for early cancellation. Vivian personally guaranteed timeline bonuses to construction crews, promising additional payments if work completed ahead of schedule. Her signature on documents committing HOA funds she didn't have authority to spend. Total financial exposure reached $240,000, including penalties, guarantees, and custom materials. Community manipulation tactics reached peak intensity. Vivian organized petition drives claiming 90% resident support for the pipeline project. Actually surveyed only 15 households, all personally selected supporters who'd received special promises about reduced HOA fees. She scheduled a groundbreaking ceremony with local officials before final permits were approved, creating false impression of government endorsement and community consensus. My reconnaissance operations provided devastating intelligence. Telephoto surveillance of construction planning meetings captured conversations between Vivian and contractors about timeline pressure and water source reliability. Audio recordings of her promising guaranteed water access to increasingly worried construction crews. Equipment operators expressing serious concerns about project viability, while Vivian dismissed all technical objections with aggressive overconfidence. The evening air carried the rumble of diesel engines warming up in the staging area as I completed final preparations for the trap that would destroy her completely. The first week of November brought Vivian's most desperate and dangerous escalation yet. She attempted to bribe me, not through lawyers or intermediaries, face-to-face in the parking lot of Henderson's Hardware, where she cornered me with a manila envelope thick as a brick. "Garrett, let's be reasonable adults here." Her voice carried that pharmaceutical sales confidence mixed with barely controlled panic. $50,000 cash for a temporary easement, just until the pipeline installation completes. The envelope smelled like her desperation. Overpowering floral perfume mixed with the musty scent of bills that had been hidden in someone's safe for months. When I refused, she increased the offer. $75,000 plus annual water management consulting fees. You'd be helping the community while earning fair compensation. I recorded every word. Rebecca confirmed the legal implications. Attempted fraud of HOA funds constituted multiple felonies. Vivian was offering money she'd embezzled from community reserves to complete a project that would personally enrich her family. But the bribery failure triggered her complete psychological breakdown. The smear campaign escalated to character assassination. She hired a local blogger to write hit pieces about my anti-development extremism and dangerous obsession with property control. Spread rumors about my mental health, claiming divorce trauma had created paranoid delusions about property rights. Filed a restraining order petition, claiming I'd threatened construction workers with physical violence. Complete fabrication based on me asking trespassers to leave my land. The harassment became stalking. Vivian began parking outside my gate during morning walks, watching through binoculars while pretending to conduct important phone calls, following me to town, staying 3 cars back but making no effort to hide her white Mercedes. The psychological pressure was constant and calculated. Then came the false flag operation that revealed her complete moral bankruptcy. She staged an environmental emergency, claiming beaver dams upstream threatened catastrophic flooding of downstream properties. Called county emergency services demanding immediate flood prevention measures, specifically authorization for emergency lake drainage. The county engineer who responded was Danny Morrison. "Garrett, there are no beaver dams anywhere near your property. This woman is attempting to manipulate emergency services to gain illegal access to your water system." Vivian had tried to weaponize government disaster response against me, but her greatest desperation move was launching actual construction despite missing permits. Ground officially broken on November 8th, with full media coverage orchestrated by Vivian's publicity machine. She convinced Mountain Vista Construction to begin preliminary site preparation, while claiming full permits were guaranteed within days. Promised timeline bonuses worth $20,000 if work stayed on schedule, regardless of regulatory delays. The sound of heavy machinery breaking ground without legal authorization carried across the valley like a declaration of war against property rights, environmental law, and basic human decency. My final preparations reached completion that week. All remote systems tested and operational with cellular backup connections. communication protocols established with media contacts for immediate response when the trap activated. Documentation packages prepared for instant distribution to law enforcement, environmental agencies, and press outlets. The Rural Property Rights Coalition coordinated our planned press conference to coincide with equipment failure, ensuring maximum media impact when Vivian's illegal construction project collapsed spectacularly. Media manipulation reached propaganda levels. Vivian invited television crews for groundbreaking coverage, scripting interviews with selected HOA residents praising community vision and progress despite obstructionist neighbors. She framed pipeline construction as environmental improvement and flood control, while claiming my opposition threatened public safety during heavy rain seasons. Professional-grade deception that cost thousands in publicity consulting fees, charged to HOA reserves. My counterintelligence revealed the financial web tightening around her throat. HOA signed additional contracts for landscape restoration after pipeline completion. Decorative stonework, walking paths, LED lighting systems for nighttime waterfall display. Vivian personally guaranteed performance bonds without board authorization, committing community assets to projects she couldn't legally approve. Total financial exposure exceeded $300,000 with all commitments, guarantees, and penalties. The countdown to destruction began in earnest. Construction equipment positioned for major excavation starting November 15th. Vivian scheduled completion ceremony for local officials and media, promising Willowbrook Falls operational by Christmas. HOA members received special assessment notices for project overruns, additional fees to cover cost escalations Vivian had hidden from original budget presentations. Contractors expressed increasing anxiety about water source guarantees as November storms began filling the valley with uncertainty about weather delays and environmental complications. The wet scent of approaching winter mixed with diesel exhaust as equipment operators prepared for the excavation that would expose Vivian's fundamental mistake. She'd built her entire project around accessing water she didn't control, couldn't legally obtain, and never had permission to touch. Tomorrow morning, I'd show her what happens when you declare war on someone who holds the thing you need most, and has legal authority to take it away with the press of a button. November 15th, 6:47 a.m. The trap finally sprung. From Rebecca's office in town, I pressed the button on my smartphone app. 18 miles away, solar-powered valves opened silently in the pre-dawn darkness. By the time Mountain Vista's construction crews arrived for major excavation, Lake Willow was dropping at 18 inches per hour. The confused radio chatter started immediately. "Dispatch, we've got a problem at the Willowbrook site. The water source is disappearing." Tom Bradley called Vivian's emergency number at 7:15 a.m., his voice carrying 3 decades of construction experience and absolute bewilderment. "Ma'am, your guaranteed water supply just vanished. Lake dropped 4 feet overnight. We can't run pipeline to an empty hole." Vivian's response was pure panic disguised as authority. "That's impossible. There must be equipment malfunction or illegal sabotage. Continue with excavation as planned." By noon, Lake Willow resembled a moonscape. 40,000 gallons of water transformed into empty mud basin, surrounded by expensive construction equipment that suddenly had nothing to connect to. The emergency HOA meeting called for 2 p.m. packed the community center beyond fire code limits. I arrived with Rebecca, carrying a leather briefcase containing documents that would end Vivian's reign permanently. Local news crews followed, having received anonymous tips about environmental crisis at luxury development site. Vivian stood at the front podium, her usual composed authority replaced by barely controlled hysteria. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing coordinated environmental terrorism designed to sabotage our community enhancement project." She pointed directly at me. "This man has illegally drained our water source through sabotage and extremist environmental obstruction." Time for the mic drop moment that would destroy her forever. I stood slowly, letting the packed room fall silent. Rebecca handed me the 1924 Water Commissioner Agreement. Century-old document that trumped every HOA vote, every county permit, every legal threat Vivian had manufactured. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'd like to introduce myself properly." My voice carried 30 years of engineering authority and 3 generations of family stewardship. My name is Garrett Murphy, and I am the legally appointed water commissioner for this entire watershed. I have held this authority since inheriting it from my grandfather in 1987. Gasps from the crowd. Vivian's face drained of color faster than her precious lake. Under Colorado revised statutes and the 1924 Valley Development Agreement, I have legal authority to regulate, divert, or restrict water flow for conservation purposes. Your pipeline project threatens watershed integrity, so I exercised emergency drainage protocols this morning. Rebecca distributed copies of the historical documents to news crews while I continued. Lake Willow isn't just decorative water, Mrs. Blackwood. It's the primary flood control system protecting every property in this valley, including yours. Without my family's century of unpaid watershed management, your expensive development would flood every spring. The room erupted in chaos. Vivian screamed accusations of conspiracy and environmental extremism, demanding HOA members support lawsuits against water terrorism and property rights abuse. But her own supporters were already calculating financial disaster. $300,000 in commitments, non-refundable deposits, equipment rental penalties, custom pipeline materials that couldn't be returned or resold. Judge Herrera stood from the back row, her retired authority still commanding instant attention. Mrs. Blackwood, Water Commissioner authority predates your HOA by nearly a century. Mr. Murphy's actions are not only legal, they're environmental protection required by state law. County Sheriff Martinez arrived in response to Vivian's emergency terrorism calls, but Danny Morrison had briefed him about the legal situation. Ma'am, Mr. Murphy has provided proper documentation of his water authority. No crimes have been committed except possibly by individuals filing false police reports. Environmental enforcement officers documented construction violations and unpermitted wetland disturbance, while news crews captured footage of empty lakebed surrounded by useless heavy machinery. Vivian's final desperate play was demanding community support for personal lawsuits against environmental extremists, destroying property values. The community center erupted in arguments as HOA members finally understood the true cost of her unauthorized financial commitments and systematic deception. She stormed out when residents began demanding her immediate resignation and full financial audit of project expenditures. The visual impact was devastating for evening news coverage. Drone footage showed empty lake beds surrounded by expensive idle equipment, while confused contractors loaded machinery for transport to paying jobs. Headlines wrote themselves. A president's illegal pipeline stopped by century-old water rights. Environmental steward drains lake to protect watershed from development. Property rights trump HOA authority in Colorado water war. Within hours, every contractor had demobilized pending legal resolution. Environmental groups organized victory celebrations. Property rights advocates used the story for legislative testimony about individual versus collective authority. That evening, I sat on my deck watching stars reflect in rapidly refilling Lake Willow, as mountain springs restored the ecosystem Vivian had tried to steal. The taste of justice was indeed sweeter than pure mountain water, especially when mixed with the sound of silence, where diesel engines used to rumble. Justice flowed downhill, faster than spring snowmelt. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove Vivian as president within 48 hours. Emergency audit revealed $85,000 in unauthorized spending and contract commitments that violated every fiduciary duty imaginable. Criminal charges followed immediately. Attempted bribery of a government official, fraud of community funds, filing false environmental reports, and conspiracy to obtain property through deception. Her husband's insurance agency lost county contracts when conflict of interest investigations revealed the scope of their coordinated corruption. The pipeline project died completely, with contractors paid cancellation fees that bankrupted the HOA's enhancement budget for the next decade. But the real victory was environmental and community healing. Over 3 days, I refilled Lake Willow to community celebration that felt like Independence Day and Christmas combined. Families gathered on public shores, watching crystal water return. Children splashing in shallows their parents thought they'd lost forever. The county declared my property a critical watershed management zone, providing legal protection against future development pressure. Environmental groups established the annual Watershed Steward Award, recognizing private citizens who protect natural resources from corporate exploitation. The Colorado Water Authority formally recognized 3 generations of Murphy family service, retroactively validating grandfather's conservation legacy. Personal transformation followed environmental restoration. I emerged from defensive isolation to become an active community conservation advocate, offering water rights consulting to rural property owners facing similar corporate pressure. Rebecca partnered with me to establish the Rural Property Rights Legal Clinic, providing affordable legal defense for individuals fighting HOA overreach and development intimidation. My border collies became neighborhood favorites during lakeside walks that now included families grateful for protected recreation access. The Lake Willow Conservation Trust launched that spring as a nonprofit managing watershed protection in perpetuity. Annual scholarship program for environmental science students. Educational programs teaching water rights and rural property management. The community festival celebrating conservation and property rights drew visitors from across Colorado, generating ecotourism revenue that far exceeded Vivian's promised pipeline benefits. Vivian's complete downfall satisfied every aspect of natural justice. Forced to sell her Mercedes to pay legal fees and restitution to bilked HOA members. Resigned from all community positions amid ongoing federal investigations. Her husband's business collapsed when municipal clients canceled contracts. They moved to a rental property in distant suburbs, anonymous among strip malls and chain restaurants. Urban exile for someone who'd tried to rule a rural kingdom. Property values actually increased after the pipeline threat ended, proving conservation enhances rather than destroys community wealth. The broader impact exceeded local victory. Our case became legal precedent for rural property rights throughout Colorado and neighboring states. Environmental law students study drainage as conservation strategy in universities nationwide. Property rights advocacy groups use our story for legislative testimony about protecting individual authority against collective pressure. Other communities adopted watershed protection ordinances based on our successful model of private stewardship serving public benefit. Personal healing came through purposeful community connection rather than defensive isolation. Morning coffee rituals now include watching families enjoy recreational access to water my grandfather protected for a century. The sound of children's laughter echoing across the lake replaced diesel engine rumbles and legal threats. Rebecca's next case involves a city planning commission versus a beekeeper whose agricultural exemptions trump zoning violations. Another David versus Goliath story where individual rights defeat bureaucratic overreach. The taste of well water remains mineral-rich and irreplaceable, carrying Mountain Springs' eternal promise that some things are worth protecting, regardless of corporate pressure or community politics. Final reflection brings deep satisfaction mixed with continued vigilance. Environmental stewardship requires active protection, not passive inheritance. Legal rights without enforcement become meaningless paper. Individual property rights protect everyone's freedom against collective tyranny. The scent of pine needles and fresh water remains unchanged despite months of conflict, proving that determined conservation can preserve natural legacy for future generations. Some battles are won through patience, preparation, and legal knowledge rather than emotional reaction. Others are won when you discover that protecting your family's legacy serves the entire community's long-term benefit.